I was watching a video of a cute couple, but my heart almost stopped when I recognized them. I was just aimlessly scrolling through videos, not expecting much, until I saw them. My husband and his college sweetheart were sharing ice cream on the street, looking so happily in love, and I had just ironed his shirt for him the previous evening. I didn't hesitate at that moment because I've been married for 40 years, but now that it's over, people always underestimate housewives, but they don't realize how vicious they can be once they wake up. On Saturday morning, my husband, Dr. Charles Bennett, left for a faculty meeting at the college. As one of the most esteemed senior professors at Eastbridge College, Charles always treated the university as if it were his second home, never leaving it, not even on the weekends. As I had become accustomed to managing this household alone, I had also grown accustomed to his early departures and late returns. That morning, I mopped the floors 3 times, did the laundry, and carefully pressed Charles's shirts and slacks. He was very particular about his clothes. They had to be immaculate, flawless, and free of wrinkles. I had followed that same routine for 40 years, but somewhere along the way, it ceased feeling like a chore and turned into our 40th wedding anniversary was today, and our son Ryan and his wife Natalie were bringing over our grandson Liam for dinner. Charles couldn't stand the smell of pork, Ryan wouldn't eat vegetables, and Natalie was on another health kick, a low-fat, low-carb diet, so I made a quick sandwich and started thinking about what groceries I'd need for the evening. Everything was bland. Liam had a seafood allergy, and organizing a family meal always gave me a headache. I ate my lunch while browsing Instagram Reels in the hopes of finding some recipe ideas, and then I noticed a local video of a gray-haired couple standing side by side on the sidewalk. The woman was laughing and holding an ice cream cone, and she tenderly lifted it toward the man's lips. He smiled and cupped her hand. Even though the person filming had only been a bystander, they couldn't help but mutter, "God, I hope I find someone to grow old with like that if I had," as he leaned in to take a bite from the same spot. Their hair had silvered, and their faces were lined with age, but the warmth between them felt tangible, like you could reach through the screen and touch it. The man was wearing a clean white shirt and charcoal gray slacks, the same outfit I had ironed for him the night before. I still had the red welt on my wrist from a steam explosion, and the polished black leather shoes on his feet were polished with shoe polish just this morning. That man was my husband, Charles Bennett, and the woman who was giving him ice cream was Vivian. If I hadn't recognized them, I might have sighed along with the beauty of lifelong love. The video played repeatedly, and I lost track of time, my vision blurred, and I didn't even realize the tears had begun until they splashed onto my apron, leaving a grease stain on the surface. Harper's beauty had not diminished despite the fine lines that her college flame time had left around her eyes. She was wearing a form-fitting vintage dress that accentuated her slim figure. I use white porcelain dishes, light utensils, and a ceramic mug, and God forbid we ever mix them up. Charles, on the other hand, has always been a freak. He eats from blue ceramic bowls with dark wooden chopsticks and drinks only from a clear glass. When it was just the two of us at dinner, he would even use a spatula to draw an imaginary line across the serving dish, a literal boundary. Back then, we lived in a small, old apartment where the stove broke every other week. I cleaned everything up and resumed cooking after I persuaded him to finish his meal, but I didn't realize the sharp pain until I had reached the invisible line, and he slammed his cutlery on the table, causing hot soup to splash all over my face. It was only a few weeks after I had given birth, and as I sat by myself, my heart clenched like it was being crushed in a vice. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. All the memories I had worked so hard to bury came flooding back like a tidal wave, and Charles and I hadn't shared a bed in 38 years, kissing hardly at all. But today I realized that I was mistaken. Charles Bennett was able to laugh, hold someone's hand, and take a bite out of an ice cream cone that another woman had. I used to think that was just who he was, distant, indifferent, and emotionally unavailable. On the few occasions we did have sex, he was cold, mechanical, never tender, and sounded pitiful. When I woke up on the couch at 4 p.m., I heard voices coming from Charles's study in low, measured academic tones. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, then went to the bedroom and changed into the nicest outfit I owned. It turns out that his obsession with cleanliness was only ever meant for me. I'm not sure if I sobbed myself to sleep or just passed out from sheer exhaustion and heartbreak. After that, I went to his study. He was on a video call with one of his students about something I couldn't even begin to comprehend, some complex academic theory. Undoubtedly, when he heard the door open, he looked over his shoulder, and in that 1 second, he moved out of frame, gave me a stern look, and gestured for me to leave. I pretended not to notice, and since I was motionless and had no other option, he carried on with his performance. I just stood there studying the man I'd lived with for 40 years. His gray hair was slicked back neatly with gel, and thin, gold-rimmed glasses rested on his prominent nose. Age had softened his once harsh features, giving him the appearance of refinement and dignity, but who would believe that this supposedly decent and kind man hadn't even bothered to check on his wife, who had passed out on the couch? Charles finally hung up the phone and shut down his laptop, his brows now lowered in a furious frown. "Why are you standing there when Ryan is coming over for dinner? You know what time it is, you haven't even started cooking, and I need to speak with you." Charles snapped. "How clumsy can you be? You can't even walk straight. Don't touch my files." I stepped forward closer to his desk, but he hesitated, almost as if he was disgusted by the thought of touching me. Perhaps I had been standing too long because my legs gave out a little, and I had to grab onto a stack of papers to steady myself. Hadn't been so familiar, that's exactly how he treated me all these years. I used to put up with it, telling myself to keep quiet and smile, but today was the first time I really felt it. "Charles, did you really attend a meeting today?" Color suddenly flooded his face, and his voice was abrasive and defensive. "You're accusing me. I've worked. Professor Bennett, have you ever considered the cost of hiring a live-in housekeeper on call around the clock? I work, but I don't get paid for it. Let me remind you, I could have gone to work every weekend for decades. If I weren't out there working, how else would you sit around this house like a damn parasite?" I looked at his contorted face, and everything became crystal clear. Charles hadn't anticipated that I would fight back like this. His lips quivered, and his posture faltered. "I don't want to argue, there's no point in dragging all this up. Just go cook dinner," but I wasn't going to let it go this time. I took out my phone, turned the volume all the way up, and held the video directly in front of his face. His expression changed to Ella. "What's going on?" This is meant to imply that I happened to run into Vivian by chance. What was I supposed to do? People love to assume things. It gave me a chilly laugh. "You're referring to that impromptu ice cream incident," but Charles, who doesn't even eat sweets, darkened his eyes and spoke in a rose voice that almost made the walls tremble. "You've always been this petty, just like 40 years ago, and you never change." I walked into the kitchen, took Charles's bowl and his drinking glass, and went back to his study. "You've spent our entire marriage keeping everything in this house separate, down to the dishes we eat from, but with Vivian Harper, you didn't seem to mind sharing a bowl. I swear to God, nothing happened between me and Vivian, and don't tarnish our friendship with your twisted suspicions." I felt a sudden, intense tiredness. "Damn ice cream cone," I said quietly, "because you've refused to eat from my bowl and drink from my cup for 40 years, no matter how clean I made them, so now I've broken yours." I raised the bowl and the glass and smashed them hard against the floor, breaking porcelain and glass shards that exploded across the hardwood. Charles jumped back in alarm. A shard of glass landed on my cheek, and I felt the sting of a drop of blood welling up. "If you dare to lie, may you and Vivian suffer rotten hell tonight." Charles froze and stared at me for a long time before responding, his voice eerily calm. "Don't be ridiculous, it's still early. I'll just go buy a new set." I laughed a little, a university professor too terrified of a curse to offer even a single reassuring lie to his wife. Charles hated me, but he married me years ago because he couldn't afford to go to college on his own. I was infatuated with him, but I knew I wasn't attractive enough for him, so I clung to my grades to feel like I was valuable. I had higher test scores than he ever had, but I sacrificed everything, quit school, and worked 3 jobs so he could complete his degree for decades. I gave him everything, and he gave me distance, coldness, and disgust in return. Now that he could hold Vivian's hand and eat from her ice cream cone without flinching, the fire that had been burning inside of me for so long finally went out. "We're done, Charles." I went to the bedroom and started packing quietly, his sour words still ringing in my ears. "You're 60 years old, and you want a break. I could hire a cleaner tomorrow who would do a better job, but you're just a housewife. You think you're worth something, and you're old. What man in his right mind would want you? Everyone needs a way to express their emotions." Charles was always the ideal gentleman in public, but as soon as he walked through our front door, he became icy, and I was clumsy, slow-witted, and unattractive. And completely unimpressive in every way, but at least I worked hard, I was healthy, I wouldn't starve on the streets, and, most importantly, I had one irreplaceable lifeline in my life, my best friend Samantha Quinn, who is wild, irreverent, and incredibly loyal. Meeting her was unquestionably the best stroke of luck I've ever experienced. At that moment, my phone buzzed, and I heard a voicemail, so I hit play. "Elaine, I just pulled out of the garage, and I'll be at your place in 20 minutes. Samantha's voice came bursting through, vibrant and unapologetic as ever. I couldn't help but laugh. "I'll wait for you downstairs. Thank you for taking me in, darling." I finished packing quickly, zipped up my suitcase, and dragged it toward the front door, but as soon as I grabbed the handle, it flew open, and Ryan was standing there. Natalie and little Liam were behind him. Ryan grabbed the suitcase out of my hand, and his voice was immediately filled with annoyance. Mom, you're too old for this kind of drama. Dad just got home from work, and he's tired, and now you're making a scene. Can't you show him some compassion? This son was raised by me, and I grew up watching Charles. Ryan's father was a respected professor, the head of the household, and the man who kept everything running. I was just a faded housewife and a background figure, and he had long forgotten how his father used to bury himself in research and tenure tracks. Ryan was a sick child who was in and out of hospitals, and I was the only one who took him to appointments and stayed by his side. He dismissed me with cold words and sharper silences. Natalie gently nudged Ryan's arm in an attempt to warn him with a glance, but Ryan just glared at her. He was, through and through, his father's son, conceited, domineering, and beyond redemption. When I didn't answer, his voice rose another notch. Dad already informed me that it was only a chance encounter with Miss Harper. You're exaggerating this. Instead of pouting and playing the victim, perhaps you should take a yoga class, go to a salon, or dosamething. Stop living in bitterness all the time. It's not like Dad isn't giving you money. Look at Miss Harper, who is the same age as you, but so graceful. She just said the ice cream was good and offered him a taste. Why are you making a federal case out of it? Do you even know how long she's waited for Dad? He never got married because of him. Since you're a grandmother now and you're having a fit about moving out, what do you think the neighbors will think? If my coworkers discovered that my 60-year-old mother was fighting with her husband like a teenager, they would laugh their asses off. Her energy is on another level, and honestly, the way you've let yourself go makes me sick just thinking about it. I looked down at my stomach, and the truth was that my limbs were still slender and my face was still in the shape of a classic oval, soft and proportionate. It was only my abdomen that stood out, so starkly protruding in a way that I could never quite hide. His words pierced my ears like jagged shards, buzzing in my ears each time, louder and crueler than the last. Charles was finishing his final semester of college at the time, juggling internships, job interviews, and endless social events with classmates from across the country. I barely got a few days of postpartum rest before I was thrown into the chaos of newborn care, managing his aging parents, and running a business. The stretch marks on my pendulous belly were deep and widespread, and my abdominal muscles had been torn apart so severely that there was a 4-finger-wide separation. The entire household alone. As Charles's career progressed and his income increased, he started to view my part-time work as a disgrace to his reputation. A working wife was beneath him. At that point, I gave in and gave up everything to become a full-time housewife. At the time, no one even discussed postpartum recovery, and I was hardly given any time to recover due to the lack of rest. I developed mild uterine prolapse. It wasn't until years later, when social media took off, that I discovered online yoga tutorials and began doing recovery exercises on my own. I've known for a while that my sacrifices were pointless, but I kept numbing myself and acting as though it didn't matter. After we finished arguing, I yanked the suitcase out of Ryan's hands and left without turning around. Liam started crying behind me, terrified by the sudden outburst of tension, but I forced myself not to turn around. Ryan's voice then sounded like a slap, even though my dad would still be in demand if you left that door without even considering returning. My eyes stung. How did that little boy who he used to call me mommy 100 times a day in his gentle baby voice, but now he's the one with the knife to my heart. I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, and a cherry red Porsche rolled smoothly to a stop at the curb. The window slid down, and there she was, Samantha, her silver gray hair glowing like polished metal in the porch light, her oversized sunglasses catching the porch light. At our age, your hair seemed meaningless, and each silver strand on her head served as a symbol of her boldness, untamedness, and unabashed individuality. She raised a hand with large gold rings and gave me a dramatic wave. When girlfriends get back together, there are no problems, just say, "Where are we going?" Couldn't help but grin and give thanks to God for Samantha. Perhaps my life wasn't so hopeless after all, and I said softly, "Let's just go to your place first." She lived in a large high-rise downtown apartment building that was almost 2,000 square feet of light-filled open space and completely her own independent. I used to tell Samantha that a woman always needs a man to lean on, but she would just laugh and shake her head. Looking back, it's almost laughable now that I realize the joke was on me all along. Samantha had never married and never envied anyone else's so-called domestic bliss. She lived boldly, freely, and with more radiance than most people ever dared to dream of. Huge takeout spread, burgers, fries, fried chicken, and even 2 cups of chocolate ice cream, my grandson's favorite. I stared at the ice cream, my mind wandering once more because I couldn't stop watching that video of Charles and Vivian sharing ice cream like lovers. Samantha thrust the cup into my hands, and the coldness of it brought me back to reality. "This is your favorite flavor, eat it before it melts," she said, scooping a huge bite. After dinner, we cleaned up and then collapsed onto her enormous, unbelievably comfortable beanbag couch. We turned on a movie and started talking, and somewhere between laughter and silence, we fell asleep. By the time I opened my eyes again, it was well into the night. It felt so cold in my mouth that it made my brain throb, but oddly, for the first time in days, my heart didn't hurt anymore. I was momentarily confused as I sat on the couch with no chores to do, no breakfast to prepare, no errands to run, and the night stretched out in front of me blank and unfamiliar. I wasn't even sure what to do with myself when Samantha woke up a short while later. She looked at the clock and grinned, as if someone wasn't going back to sleep, and she took hold of my hand. I blinked at this hour, wondering where we were going. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curled into a mischievous smile, and said, "That tired old outfit of yours, trash it, it's bringing the whole vibe down." She then pulled me toward her bedroom, stopping in front of her walk-in closet, and said, "Pick something to wear." Samantha had already thrown a deep purple velvet jumpsuit into my arms, saying, "Stop complaining, put this on, I just bought it's perfect for you." She then grabbed her keys and walked toward the door, saying, "I'll be waiting in the car." I shook my head and laughed helplessly, wondering what I could do since she was already halfway out. I couldn't exactly let her go alone, but what I didn't anticipate was that she was taking me to a nightclub. When we pulled up, my stomach dropped, and I followed her out of the car, clutching the corner of her jacket like a lost child. I had never been in a place like this before, and as soon as we entered, a young man who was the bar manager hurried over, beaming from ear to ear. "Miss Quinn, I haven't seen you in days." I followed her past the thumping bass of the bar area up a staircase lined with staff who all greeted her like she owned the place. My heart was pounding, and my blood pressure must have been sky high. As usual, Samantha tossed him her car keys upstairs in the VIP suite without missing a beat. Of course, she parked, washed the car, and sent up a few charmers while you were at it. Samantha clapped me on the shoulder and laughed loudly and carelessly, saying, "When you're with me, someone else will do the singing, someone else will do the dancing, someone else will drink the damn cocktails, all you have to do is have fun." I whispered, "I can't sing, I can't dance, and I don't drink." Miss Quinn, the manager, smiled and said, "Here's the best selection in the house, you and your friend take your pick." Samantha waved him off with a flick of her wrist. "Thank you can go now." The door clicked shut, and it seemed as though a signal had been given. The group of young men was all tall, stylish, and in their 20s or early 30s. The young men seamlessly moved in half toward her and half toward me. One of them, with a boyish smile, stood behind me and began gently massaging my shoulders. Another sat next to me and offered a tray of sliced fruit. A third came with a glass of champagne, leaning in slightly and asking politely if I wanted a drink. The boldest of the group, he lifted his t-shirt just enough to show off his toned chest and flashed a mischievous grin. "Hey gorgeous, you want to feel how fast I was, probably older than his mother," and I sat there frozen, not knowing where to look, with my hands awkward in my lap. Samantha was laughing uncontrollably at the panic on my face, and she handed me a glass of red wine, clinking it gently against mine. My heart is racing. Oh my God, this world has gone completely crazy. Are you having fun, Elaine? If you're happy. Then I took a long sip of the wine, and then I felt as though I was seeing the Samantha I had first met years ago, wild, untamed, fiercely independent, the same woman who once shoved her cheating fiancé into a lake, broke off the engagement, constructed an empire from scratch, and turned heartbreak into fortune. This life is ours, and it's meant to be lived for ourselves. I hadn't felt this alive in years, and, thank God, it felt good. I ended up staying at Samantha's place, which was only meant to be temporary, but I knew deep down that I had taken the first step and that I wasn't going back. The morning after we returned from the club, I called a lawyer, and Charles received the divorce papers that same day. He didn't reply at all, but I wasn't in a rush, so I thought I'd give him a few days to process the situation. Ryan called this time, and his tone was noticeably softer. "Mom, don't you think it's time to let this go? Don't you miss Liam?" I laughed coldly. "Remember that you're the one who told me that once I left that house, I shouldn't bother coming back." He tried to reassure me for a while, but when he realized I wasn't moving, his voice became sharp once more. "What's up with this divorce agreement? Why should you receive a portion of Dad's savings and house? You're going to steal our money and live with an elderly man." I didn't even recoil. Trust me, I've been more than giving. I could have taken everything. 40 years of marriage gives me that right, but I didn't. I gave your father a chance to keep his dignity, or I added that I could just release that video of Ryan's tone abruptly changed to one filled with rage. "You're nothing but a bitter old woman, you'll never have the class Vivian has. Go ahead. And keep playing the victim when Dad finally marries her. You'll regret walking out. I didn't bother to respond, I hung up mid-rant. A few days later, Natalie called me in private to tell me that at that point, I realized why Ryan had suddenly become so desperate to get me back. It turned out that Charles's life had fallen apart completely without me. I had cared for him for 40 years, to the point where he was unable to pour himself a glass of water. He continued to change his clothes every day, but now his laundry was piled up in the bathroom, untouched and in a state of chaos. With no one to cook, he began ordering takeout from the diner downstairs after meals. At first, Ryan asked Natalie to help clean up for his father, but Ryan never did anything at home, and Natalie was already overburdened trying to juggle everything. She just couldn't handle Charles's disaster zone on top of it. Eventually, Ryan hired a housekeeper through an agency to take care of his dad, but things took a turn for the worse. Containers just sat there, cluttering the dining table, the mess growing by the day. When she was in her 40s, she decided she wanted to visit Charles after seeing a professor who had a good pension and savings. One day, when Charles received an invitation to give a guest lecture out of town, Ryan came to help him pack. When he opened the bedroom door and froze, he saw the housekeeper sprawled out across Charles's bed. At first, Ryan assumed she was being lazy and hurried over to yank off the covers, only to be met with when Natalie told me. I laughed so hard that my stomach hurt. It sounded like something from a ridiculous soap opera, but now that it had nothing to do with me, Ryan went crazy. He called the agency right away and fired her right away. Ryan then called me again to plead with me to come home, and I just thanked Natalie for being honest with me and saying that I would visit Liam in a few days, but I wouldn't be going back to that house because Charles and Ryan had made it very evident to them that I was only ever their most practical unpaid housekeeper and never really a wife. The next time I saw Charles Bennett, I was outside the family courthouse, wearing jeans and a beige hoodie, my hair freshly dyed a deep chestnut brown, and I was dressed simply but firmly. Felt more radiant than I had in years. Charles, on the other hand, was wearing his typical old-school academic attire, but this time his white shirt was wrinkled, the collar was crooked, and the sleeves were misaligned. He never would have left the house like that before. I didn't make fun of him because there was no point anymore, I just hoped the paperwork would go quickly. That afternoon, I had a yoga session with Samantha, and when Charles saw me, a look of surprise crossed his face. The weight loss is from a thermage treatment, and the glow is from good tailoring. It has nothing to do with you guys, whether you're 16 or 60, and you never lack ego. What surprised me, though, was that Charles didn't lash out. Instead, he looked at me with an excruciatingly forced tenderness. Do we really have to go? I looked him in the eye calmly and clearly. Charles, it's clear that you're not doing well, but the truth is that I am. He seemed to have more to say, but in the midst of this, we've been married for 40 years, and we're like left and right hands. You know I'm not good with words, but I've never done anything truly wrong to you, Vivian, and I. It was just reminiscing. Despite her advanced age, Vivian had just stepped out of a taxi wearing a sharply tailored suit and a silk scarf draped delicately around her neck. She approached us with a gentle smile, as though this awkward situation were the most natural thing in the world. Charles appeared flustered, hurrying to explain that Vivian had come to support me because she was worried when she heard about the divorce. You know, I've always thought of her as a sister, and I muttered something that sounded familiar because 38 years ago you said the same thing. Are you reluctant to sign the papers, or are you hoping to play that old, worn-out game again? Vivian had been Charles's college friend, and they had always kept things vague enough to say that I was innocent. I still remember him screaming at me, furious, "You're just a jealous woman." He was already pregnant with Ryan at the time, so I forced myself into that marriage and forced him to break off his relationship with her in order to pay for the baby's tuition and Charles's tuition. From that point on, he carried that resentment like a grudge, and Vivian was his representation of youth and his unattainable dream. Vivian stood in front of me, her tone calm, her posture perfectly measured. If I've caused a rift between you and Charles, I'm truly sorry, but please believe me, I never intended to interfere in your marriage. I was the stain he couldn't wash off, never elegant enough, never refined enough, just a stain he had to live with. She tilted her head. Their eyes locked in a tender, lingering gaze, and I could almost hear her inner monologue. Poor Charles, stuck in a loveless marriage for all these years, would never dare express regret in front of her. Just as I thought he would, Vivian gave her a gentle glance before reverting to his patronizing tone. Vivian, don't waste your breath. She wouldn't understand our bond, she never did if divorce is what you're talking about. The moment Vivian saw the divorce agreement, her calm expression instantly changed. Why should she get so much of your estate? This is completely unfair, she practically screamed, and I smiled. She wants me to be the bigger person and let her go. Charles, Vivian, and Vivian clinging to each other in front of me was enough to make anyone gag. No, Charles, don't get the wrong idea. I'm just worried that she's taking advantage of you. You've always been too kind. I don't want her to walk away with everything you've worked for. Marriage is none of your business, or do those treasured memories between you two only survive with a healthy bank balance? Vivian's face stiffened. I was worn out by their pitiful little play, Charles. I told them, either you sign this agreement today, or I'll walk that video straight into your department office. Let's see how the faculty reacts to their esteemed professor pushing his wife out the door just so he can rekindle a new flame. I looked at Vivian to give my words time to sink in before I added, you've never cared about money. We built everything from nothing together. You're not the type to be materialistic. The only thing I was genuinely thankful for in this entire marriage was how well I knew Charles's weaknesses for the long time. Slowly and deliberately, a ghost from 30 years ago, not a new flame, came crawling back for a second chance. Vivian opened her mouth to snap back, but she caught herself still clinging to her poised and elegant image. Her face flushed crimson, and her jaw clenched so tightly that I thought her teeth might crack. As we signed the final documents, Charles was still trying to impress Vivian. Don't worry, sweetheart, he said, puffing up his chest. I can still write papers and lead research. Money comes and goes, but I'm the asset here. Losing face at the institution he dedicated his entire life to was worse than death, so yes, I left that courthouse with my divorce certificate and a sizable portion of his assets. Vivian looked at me with a smug little smile and said, you'll regret this. She said, you just lost an extraordinary man. I smiled back, coolly, he's 60. If he can still be called a man, it's probably thanks to medication, but hey, if you're happy to take the leftovers I tossed out, be my guest. They were too shocked to wake up early, but not to make breakfast or iron shirts anymore. Instead, I started my mornings with a glass of water and 30 minutes of yoga in the sun. I watered the plants, brewed tea, and curled up in a rocking chair. Life after divorce turned out to be even lighter and more joyful than I'd imagined. Samantha flat out refused to let me move out. Chair on the balcony with a book and waited for Samantha to wake up so we could go to the small diner on the corner for breakfast. We even discussed adopting a dog and a cat. Suddenly, my days were full of things to look forward to, while Charles's days steadily descended into chaos as he and Vivian secretly registered their marriage. Ryan, of course, was overjoyed. I told Natalie in private that although my mom took half of Dad's assets, she is too old to have any more children, so when she passes away, everything will come back to me. In addition, Dad's marriage to Vivian is fortunate because she is childless. Who knows, maybe she will even assist me financially. After all, she is now living off of my dad's money, so she will need to maintain her good standing with me. As the years passed, Charles's life became a comedy show that Samantha and I laughed over during afternoon tea. Their first real argument was over Charles standing up and splashing the toilet seat, and Vivian was furious and told him to sit down because her entire demeanor screamed status and money. In other words, Vivian didn't look like someone who married for love. Charles exploded, saying, I'm a man, sitting to pee makes me no different from a woman. Vivian didn't take it well and snapped back, saying, maybe take something for your prostate so you stop dribbling like a broken faucet. She didn't say this in private, rather, she said it during a family dinner in front of Ryan and Natalie, or whatever authority Charles had. Charles's nearly $20,000 monthly salary disappeared like water down a drain, and I occasionally questioned whether, after putting up with all the small arguments and mess in the house, Charles still saw his ideal lover the same way he had the first time around. Vivian didn't do any housework. She sent her clothes to be dry cleaned, demanded restaurant meals every night, and hired cleaning services every couple of days. I raised an eyebrow, thinking, isn't that Vivian's job now that she's the wife, after all? His voice was frantic. On the phone, Mom, Dad's in the hospital. He was attacked. It's serious. Can you come see him just for old time's sake? This was 2 days into a road trip I'd taken with Samantha after the divorce. There was a pause, and then I heard Natalie shout in the background. I said, send me the hospital address, and I'll go, but as soon as I put the phone down, I turned to Samantha and told her the entire story. She laughed so hard that she started crying. This was Vivian's ex-husband and her son who attacked him. I froze, wondering how the same Vivian who had claimed to love only Charles her entire life had a husband and a son. Then I turned the car around and ended our trip early because, yes, some train wrecks are just too delicious to watch from a distance. Before I went to the hospital, I called Natalie to confirm the room number and to find out what the hell had actually happened. She told me that it was more than I could have ever imagined. Vivian had been married more than once, and each marriage had been more chaotic than the last. Her most recent husband was a walking mess who was also a drinker, gambler, and brawler. She was tired of that mess and decided to target Charles, a university professor who had savings and a steady pension. In her opinion, he was a walking retirement fund. She charmingly persuaded her husband to get a divorce, promising him that once I get Charles's for a while, it worked. She moved in with Charles, who was the ideal companion, and stopped communicating with her ex. However, people like her ex don't just vanish, and her ex didn't take the betrayal well. He arrived at Charles's college with their biological son in tow and went on a full-fledged rampage in front of the lecture hall, pointing at Charles's face and shouting, "You think you're some noble." It was a fatal blow, and by the time I got to the hospital, Charles had just regained consciousness. He lifted his hand feebly and whispered, "Vivian, can you?" "Professor, you're nothing more than a homewrecker." Then he punched Charles, and another beat him so severely that he ended up bruised, bleeding, and completely humiliated in front of his students. I sighed. Two souls were drawn to each other because neither of us liked to play small. I used to love fiercely and give everything to the person I chose, but I dropped to the floor. His muttered voice was shaking, "And you never yelled at me." I made a poor decision. Decades of silent endurance wore me down, smoothing out even my sharpest edges. I became timid and hesitant, practicing every sentence in my mind before speaking to avoid upsetting him. However, that wasn't who I was. That was the role that women in my generation were taught to play: be quiet, be agreeable, and be soft. Charles continued to babble and cry, unraveling like a man who had lost his mind. I pressed the nurse's call button and left without turning around. Later, Ryan called me several times for the same reason, pleading for help. It turned out that Vivian was not helping the man in the hospital bed but rather was spending his money like a full-time job. The worst part was that her ex-husband and her son had moved into Charles's house. Aside from the bruises that Vivian occasionally attempted to hide, they appeared to be one large, happy family. Ryan was no match for Vivian's ex, but he wasn't a pushover either. The man even made a bold offer: "You want Vivian to divorce him? Fine, have Charles hand over everything and walk out penniless." Charles's job had long since ended, and what little savings he had left were rapidly depleting, so he couldn't even afford a nurse anymore. Of course, Ryan wouldn't accept this. I knew what it was that he was considering divorce because, at least, she still has time, she's young, and she has a chance to leave before she's stuck in a marriage that drains her life away, and I don't want Liam growing up. Regardless, he was drowning in the mess now, laughing at everyone, and bringing his frustration home. Natalie began coming to see me with Liam, and I sensed something changing in her, a quiet heaviness, a weight in her voice. I wasted 40 years on a man who never deserved me, but I hope that every woman in the world finds the courage to love and be loved completely and deeply, and that when love is gone, she knows when to walk away so that she never chains herself to someone's indifference. I learned how to treat women from someone like Ryan. Elaine was so quiet in our 40 years of marriage that she never really raised her voice at me, even when she was upset. It was only a few mild complaints before she returned to ironing my shirts and making my dinner. I always assumed she couldn't live without me and that she would be by my side for the rest of my life. May yours never have to reflect mine. Woman who sacrificed everything for her family, a woman who had no identity of her own, and whose entire world revolved around me and our son. I never thought she would leave. In fact, I didn't even think she was capable of doing so. What I felt for her was habitual familiarity rather than true love, but in reality, the woman I had rejected for 40 years ended up being the stronger one all along. I thought it was a passing phase until the day she gave me those divorce papers, when I realized Elaine had changed and it wasn't temporary. I was furious and shocked, even thinking she had gone insane. I was her husband, the head of the household, and she stopped agreeing to everything without question, changed her hairstyle, dyed it, and started dressing with a crisp, confident edge. I tried to stop her and tried to talk her out of it by telling her that we're too old for this kind of drama. I even pulled out old pictures of us when we were younger in the hopes that she would feel the need to earn a piece of my assets, but all she said was, "Charles, I'm done pretending," and in that moment, I realized something I'd never fully understood in her heart. After the divorce, I told myself that even though I had left with dignity, at least I still had Vivian. Vivian was beautiful, polished, and refined at first, but life has a way of tearing that facade down. She had high standards, and every surface needed to be cleaned by a professional, and every meal had to leave a fancy restaurant where all of her clothes had to be dry cleaned. She didn't do any housework, or unless I did it myself, even the hand soap was refilled. Our first argument was over the toilet, and I had left the seat soiled. She commanded me to sit down and urinate going forward, and I snapped, "I'm a man," she said. She said it in front of my son and daughter-in-law when she first learned how to aim or take anything for your prostate. The embarrassment I had at the time was far worse than it was when I was denied my scholarship years earlier. When I arrived at the hospital, Elaine was the only person I wanted to see. When I realized she was gone, I stood by the bed calmly and motionless, my eyes cold and aloof, and I pleaded with her to return. She added with a smile, "If you had pleaded with me earlier, I might have slapped you awake, but now I'm frightened. I'm not interested in a murder charge, and a slap may kill you." After she went, I sobbed for the first time in 40 years. Years passed, and I still cried, but I never fully understood Elaine. She wasn't weak, she was kind, yet she left because she couldn't leave. She stayed because she wanted to, but I crushed her soul for 40 years till nothing remained left to give, and she took the lady who had previously loved me unconditionally with her when she departed. Vivian was never really home, therefore. There was a mess left behind that I couldn't clean up. She brought her children, her ex-husband, and her plots into my life, which is how I anticipated she would be. I do regret using my own ATM, but it's lonely and pitiful. Knowing that she will never look back is the cruelest part of regret. Elaine is living a better life than she has ever had, and I have only memories and an unending, sour kind of sorrow remain.